Hey Oz, nice of you to join in. Good to see you.
Hey Jeff, how are you?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for being willing to share your story. So, just going to ask you, tell us a little bit about your background.
No worries, Jeff. So I'm from a small city called Mutare in Zimbabwe. That's where I was born and raised. But when I was 17, I immigrated to Ireland with my family because the economy in Zimbabwe at that point had started to worsen. Whilst at that same time, the economy in Ireland was booming. This was the time of the Celtic Tiger, so it just made sense to come here. So we moved over here with my family, and ever since that time, I have had the privilege of calling Ireland my home.
Ireland's your home now, but in Zimbabwe, did you have a religious upbringing?
Most definitely, for sure. In Zimbabwe, by and large, there is no such thing as an atheist. Everyone believes in the existence of God. I would characterize Zimbabwe as a God fearing country. So when I was growing up, yes, I had a religious background. So although everybody believes in God, there's a divergence in which God people pray to and how to relate to Him. So the two main ones in Zimbabwe are either through the church or through the ancestors. So this is ancestral spirits and ancestral worship. So those are the two main ones. So in the ancestral worship, this is where your dead relatives are now spirits and they look after you. And if you live well, the ancestral spirits will bless you and all will go well with you. But if you are a terrible person, then the ancestral spirits will curse you and things will not go well with you because they will not dispense those blessings to you. And this was a way to relate to God. And then there is the church. So these are the two main ones that are in Zimbabwe. But I've also come to realize that in my new adopted country of Ireland, that many people actually relate to God in the same way as the ancestral spirits, where people think that they have to be good enough. They need to live well to have a relationship with God, and they relate with God that way. So I guess it's just not a Zimbabwe thing.
Yeah, so people here are similar to people in Zimbabwe in trying to appease God. But back with you in Zimbabwe, which of the two did you go for? Were you into ancestral spirits and worship, or were you into the church?
From those two options, I was sympathetic to the church, not because I liked the church, but frankly because the church was less scary for me. Because the ancestral worship and spirits, I didn't know much about it, but the little that I did know about it actually scared me. And the rituals and the customs that you have to do were just out of my depth and out of my league. And as a young person, I didn't want anything to do with that. So I wanted to stay far away from that. So I was sympathetic to the church, but not because the church was any good. It was just less scary. And that was just my character growing up. I just was a scaredy cat.
Fear of ancestral worship that led you to going to the church, was it?
Not really. I mean, my fear of the ancestral spirits just kept me away from that practice and made me sympathetic to the church, but it didn't make me go to church or walk into the church's door regularly. What got me to church on a regular basis, week in, week out, was my mother. My mother took no nonsense, and when she said you go to church, you go to church. So myself and my siblings, we grew up going to church week in, week out because it was just a non-negotiable in our family. If mom says you're going to church, you're going to church, and that's what we did. But after going to church for a couple of years, it actually turns out that I loved going to church. I liked the activities that were going on there. I loved the preaching, I loved the singing, I loved the memorizing of Bible passages and fellowshipping with people. So as a place to hang out, I actually liked going to church, which is weird enough for a young person.
But when would you say you became an actual Christian as opposed to someone who just attends church?
The short answer will be I don't know, because I've been attending church from a very young age because, as I said, it was a non-negotiable. So I have always been going to church. So I really don't know the point where I would have come to say this was the moment, the time and date when I became a Christian. And that question really bothers me, or really bothered me a lot, because I would talk to a lot of my friends and they would have a time and date and a moment when that happened for them. But for me, I really don't have that moment. But what gives me comfort is passages, for instance, in Psalm 95, where he talks about today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. So what gives me comfort is today, do I believe the gospel? Do I believe Jesus Christ is God, that he came to save me? Do I believe that today? So I do believe that today. So I've made peace with that question.
Particular stab in the dark of when that might be, when you really did grasp Jesus?
If I was to take a stab at it, I would probably say when I was 10, because there was a holiday where I went to visit my relatives, my uncle and aunt. So in Zimbabwe, holiday would have been going to your aunties for like a month. So when I was 10, I did that. And when I went on holiday to their house for that month, and I observed how they lived out their Christianity and how it was so personal to them, and how they quite serious about it. It made me ponder that, do I believe this myself?
Thought seriously about what God had done for you. Was it a case of you do this for God and God will do this for you? Is that what you understood?
No, so for me, it was actually coming out of that way of thinking, a way of thinking that made me relate to God based on my performance, how good I was. Was I good enough so that God would love me? Was I good enough so that I could go to heaven? And part of even that religiously going to church was actually a way of trying to appease God, that if I go to church so many times a week, then God will relate to me better, and then God will get me to heaven. So it was actually coming out of that and realizing, no, it's about grace, meaning that it's a free gift. I don't have to contribute anything to it. I don't have to do some religious exercise or some religious experience, but it's a gift. And the gift is Jesus Christ came and died for me on the cross to save me from the wrath of God that I justly deserve because I've rebelled against God, who's my maker. And then to now understand that Jesus Christ came and died for me, and all I had to do was just to receive that gift. It's a gift. So just put out your hands and receive that gift. And that's what I came to understand, that all I had to do was just receive that gift and then live my life out of gratitude of that gift.
Did that mean you figured most things out when you became a Christian?
Certainly not. And I even still up to this point haven't figured out all things, but I am growing, I'm maturing as a Christian. But at some point, after I became a Christian, for a couple of years, I actually got hooked up into some way of teaching called the prosperity teaching, which says if you're good enough, then God will bless you. So if you're a good enough Christian, then God will give you prosperity, will give you health, and will give you wealth, and all will go well with you. So essentially, there should not ever be a poor Christian or a Christian who is unwell. So this way of thinking was frankly messed up, because it was reverting back to that way of relating to God again, that is based on my performance. If I am good enough, then God will do this for me. It's almost like treating God like a vending machine. So you put a coin and you get what you want. So just put in good works, and then God will bless you with this. And if you do bad things, then curses will come out, which is really reverting back to the ancestral spirits way of thinking, that if I do good, then the ancestors will bless me, and if I do bad, then the ancestors will curse me. So I went back into that sort of teaching, which is taught by some forms of Christianity, which is essentially wrong. So it took me a couple years to come out of that.
Helped in moving along in that process?
What helped me was the fact that I got introduced by a friend to a Bible believing church. By this I mean a church that actually taught from the Bible. So they just didn't refer to the Bible as a token to then talk about whatever that they wanted to talk about, but rather the teaching was derived from the Bible itself. You could see the chapter and verse that the pastors and the teachers were taking the teaching from. So this really helped me to work out a lot of this prosperity teaching, to actually see that a lot of it is just coming out of verses that are actually taken out of context. You just need to read the other verses that surround those popular verses that people use to support the prosperity teaching. So I greatly benefited from a local Bible preaching church.
I would say passionate about that. Is that correct?
Yes, you observe right. I mean, these sorts of teachings do damage. So, for instance, for myself, in those years that I was under this sort of teaching, anything that would go wrong in life, as life does, because if you live long enough, you will suffer. So, something will always go wrong because we live in a world that's not perfect. But I would then put the blame on me because I must be doing something wrong. So I must not be having enough faith. I must not be living life very well. So what have I done wrong not to be wealthy? What have I done wrong not to be rich? What have I done wrong, not to be prospering? So I always then was blaming myself. So that was a deadly teaching, and it just takes away people's joy. And what really makes me so passionate about this is it takes away from the gospel of grace. So when people are usually under this sort of teaching, it's almost like the gospel of grace is sidelined. So what Jesus came and did dying on the cross, which is the main thing, is actually sidelined and it's pushed to the side. And a lot of the time you're just hearing about this is what you need to do to prosper, this is what you need to do to prosper, which is not right.
Any parting words that you want to pass on?
I would encourage people to look into Christianity for themselves. It is about grace. It's about what Jesus Christ came to do for us. But if you look at any other form of religion that's out there, and just highlighting, for instance, for me growing up with the ancestral spirits, it's all based on what I can do for God. That's how all forms of religion are trying to relate to God. And what I came to find to figure out for myself is you can never do enough. You can never be secure or assured that you've done enough. Even if you've done a lot, you always know that there's something you haven't quite done right. So it's never enough. So I would just encourage people to look at Christianity, and it's about grace. It's actually not about what we can do, but it's about what Christ came and did for us. And for those that grew up around the church, around the Bible's teaching with their Christian parents, for instance, or even a Christian heritage, maybe it was your extended family, please make sure that you are just not going through the motions, that you actually don't believe these things, but you do things that make you seem like a Christian, but just examine for yourself whether you believe it or not. And then the last one would just be make sure you're going to a Bible believing church and be reading your Bible to make sure that you don't get hoodwinked with things such as prosperity teaching. That's just one form of teaching that hoodwinks people. There are many forms out there, but if you just read your Bible, then you would not be susceptible to these sorts of things. So thank you, Jeff, for giving me this time.
Thank you very much, Oz, for that. I really appreciate you sharing your story. Thanks for taking the time out.
No worries, Jeff.
Cheers.